Good evening. John Armstrong, Director of Off-Campus Student Services. Mark, to your question of do we make references or refer students specifically to where they would live off campus, we really look to market. We work closely with property managers of large properties. We have a smaller percentage of single-family rentals that we work through on our website, which is the Off-Campus Student Housing website. If a student says they're looking to live in a house off campus, it becomes challenging for us to say specifically where that house might be or where they might, excuse me, where they could be living. It's easier for us to identify large properties such as high-density housing that would be on the bus line, that would be within walking distance. So in terms of your point, it's really what students are looking for, and we create a rubric in our office when a student comes in specifically around what they need, what their needs are. If a student says, I have no vehicle, we're going to look at a high-density housing that's going to be on the bus line. If they say, I would like to live in a house, that becomes more challenging. On our website, we have a small percentage of those houses, and it becomes more challenging as to where those houses are located. In the town of Mansfield, there are easily over 400 single-family rentals. We have less than a quarter of those houses on our website that are identified. The relationship we have with large properties is we meet with the large property managers at least 3 times a semester, so we have a stronger relationship with them.
Thank you all.
You're welcome.
Ms. Raymond, followed by Ms. Moran, followed by Mr. Shake.
I have a couple questions. Your projection for the sheet with your blue bar has it through 2016 in terms of your cumulative change from 2006 on student. I think the master plan or wherever we got our data that indicates that there's going to be 5,000 students over the next 10 years, which is double, a little bit less than double. Is 5,000 students still your projection over the next 10 years?
Mr. First, do you want to try that one?
Sure, I'll take a swing. I think that, as I mentioned, as I started, the multiple years out, it becomes ambiguous. There's a lot of different factors from year to year that we have to look at, including the state finances in order to support enrollment growth. And that's glaring in our faces right now as we have the conversations with legislators and things. And so, but there's other forces at play too. But, you know, if we were to stop today, it would be around 1,800 growth to 2,000 student growth as a part of that plan. And, you know, if we don't see any additional operating funds to support that enrollment growth, we think that's reality.
Thank you. Ms. Raymond, you said you had another question?
Well, yeah, I guess the bottom line is, I mean, we as a town, via letters signed by zoning and our mayor, indicate that we have a problem. That we were promised a number of beds, and that we're not going to be getting them. We heard this evening some anecdotal evidence or comments that, oh, well, gee, people must have heard about, private sector must have heard about that there was going to be this next-gen Connecticut. And so they came rushing into town, and maybe this is a question more for the mayor or for our development office as to, Next Gen was announced, what, 2 years ago?
Longer.
Do we have any data as to how many homes just in that period have been converted in town from private single-family homes to rentals?
Mr. Ninto's office has those figures, and the groups around town who are researching this issue have provided those figures, yes.
And what's that number offhand?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, sorry.
Is you have questions for our guests?
Yeah, we have a problem. We've sent letters
questions for our
indicating-
guests.
Okay. How are you going to address the town's concerns with regard to the loss of the housing that was indicated the town was going to receive that apparently was going to dovetail with the student growth?
I think the 2 dorms you're referring to first are the Next Gen dorm, which will be opening this fall, and I think your question alludes to the Honors dorm.
Which is the Connecticut Commons, which is no.
The Honors dorm is on South Campus.
That's correct. It was projected to be on South Campus. And would you like to answer? So I'm going to ask Laura Cruikshank to answer the question about the honors dorm and our decision not to move forward at this time with building it.
Welcome, Ms. Cruikshank.
Hello, I'm Laura Cruikshank. I am the University Master Planner and Chief Architect, and I run planning, design, and construction in Stores, the 5 regionals, in the law school. And for the record, I own a home at 214 Wormwood Hill Road, and we just moved in there in September, just finished renovating and all that. So very happy to be a resident of the town of Mansfield. Just want you all on the council to know that, you know, you're representing me too. So for the Honors Residence Hall, we have a typical process for all of our projects. We go to the Board of Trustees at the planning phase, the design phase, and the construction phase. And we went through the planning phase and the design phase with the Board of Trustees. And somewhere around a year ago, I'd have to check the timing, but it was around a year ago, decided to pause in terms of going for the construction. And the reason was that it was becoming more evident that there were going to be operating budget issues, and we have always said that the increase in student enrollment was completely tied to an increase in the operating budget to be able to support those students. So that became a question, the operating budget. Therefore, the enrollment growth became a question. And the third question was that we weren't really sure how many of the different developers were going to be building facilities around the UConn campus. And so there were a lot of unknowns, and so we felt it was not prudent for us to go forward and start building the building. So we did not go to the board for that particular construction issue.
Thank you, Ms. Cruikshank. Next up is, hold on a second, I will announce the queue. Ms. Moran, followed by Mr. Shaken, followed by Mr. Katchenberger.
All right. First of all, I chair the committee looking at rental regulations. So we do have the numbers that you have asked for, Virginia. They are in our materials. They've been provided by the town as well as by the Neighbors Preservation Group. One of the issues that has arisen, that arose, that we have seen time and time again, is that it's very difficult to determine where students are actually living. You don't keep, or you don't have on file, students' current local address. And that causes some, you know where they are if they're in the dorms, if they're living on campus, but if they're living off campus, if a student gives as their local address their home in Simsbury, and yet they're living on Hunting Lodge Road, there's a real gap in information there. We would very much like you to be able to provide actual home addresses for students, local home addresses.
Could Mr. Gilbert or one of you address that comment?
I don't think they have an answer for it because we've asked for it before. I'm really extending a request from the committee.
We've asked for it before, Ms. Moran, but I think the issue goes beyond, Mr. Armstrong does an extraordinary job. The question goes beyond his pay grade. So the question is, and it's not a question it's not that I want to know where the students live. I think it's a question that the university does not know. In fact, there's a number, there are numbers in this chart about students living in high-density housing, but if we really don't know where our students are living, I'm just trying to frame Ms. Brand's comment as a question. Are there any plans to really know where our off-campus students are living?
I don't have the background on what informs the current practice. I don't know if this has been pursued previously by the university. We have an audit and an accounting for all student addresses on campus. I don't know what precludes the university from capturing similar information for the commuting population. So that's something we can inquire about. It is the registrar's office and their files that captures the information that students provide about their addresses and their contact information. And I do know at UConn and other universities I'm familiar with, it's oftentimes not the most current or the local information that's provided by students. So we would need to do we would need to determine what the university's current practice is and what has precluded it from securing the information that's been inquired about.
Mr. Gilbert, if you would do that, that'd be great.
All right,
Ms.
my
Moran?
second question.
Go ahead, Ms.
is,
Moran.
And student enrollment obviously has a huge impact on the town, but it isn't the only thing that has an impact on the town. The development of Next Gen and the technology park and so on have a very real impact. And I'm wondering, besides holding off on the planned increases in enrollment, what other kinds of changes have the current capital projects changes has the current budget caused you to make?
Ms. Cruikshank.
Thought I should bring my chair over. At the moment, there are no other changes in the projected capital program that we are contemplating. So again, because whether we had 1,000 students or 5,000 students as an increase, they were never all going to get there on the same day. So we always picked a middle range of 2,500 that we were dealing with in terms of our classrooms and teaching labs and faculty offices and everything else. So we're all set up in terms of our capital program and capital projects to be able to accommodate up to that number of students. The master plan, being a 20-year vision, shows what can happen further out. And the reason it's important to do that is because we really can't project that far out in terms of enrollment. So it's important ecologically to look at where buildings would be and what types of buildings they would be. And this is done in a manner that densifies at the core of the campus and does not spread out to the surrounding areas of the town.
Thank you. Most patient man on the council, Mr. Shaken.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got a few questions, so you're going to have to bear with me.
I'm sure you do.
apologize. So thank you all for coming, and Mike, I think you're right, what you said at the beginning, that there's a lot of different factors at play here. I certainly, as a UConn student several years ago now, who lived off campus from my parents' house 2 miles away, and then 2 years in an apartment 4 miles away that I had to pay for. Demand is a big part of this, and student desires. I understand the points that you made and some of the contentions about our letter. I think some of them are arguable, but we'll leave that. I'm going to try to sort of frame this in a way that I think should impact your decision-making about it. We've heard a lot about how it's impacting our neighborhoods and the residents that are permanent residents, and I think that's, and you have too, and so I'll leave that for another time, but there's lots of other factors in addition to student demand for on-campus or off-campus housing that are driving this. I think a lot of our evidence is anecdotal, but it's strong anecdotal. As a recent buyer of a small, affordable home in Mansfield, I know that I was competing with a significant number of investors. My home buying process was involved in that, and I think that experience is shared by peers I have. Someone who just bought a home in Mansfield might agree. The housing market's coming back, but prices in Mansfield and around the state are not rising. Sales are going up, but prices are not. And that, combined with the kind of stock that we've got in town, makes it an attractive proposition to investors. You can make some money on a house in Mansfield, and you add the demand in there. It's got an effect all around, though. We have almost no affordable housing on our rental market here, and that's a big problem. And that prices out grad students from living in Mansfield. It prices out young families that are starting their jobs, their careers at UConn. And there's long-term effects on our housing market and from a home buying perspective and our housing stock regarding maintenance, future attractiveness for buyers. And I sort of want to remind everyone in the room that we represent not just the whole town, but that includes the 13,000 students that live on campus. It includes the number of those 1,500 commuters who are living at home, who grew up in Mansfield, whose home is in Mansfield. It includes some number of the 10,000 or so undergraduate and graduate commuters that live in Mansfield. It includes the staff, et cetera. And so we've got a duty to make sure that the folks that are living off campus, whether in single-family homes or in high-density houses, are safe and are, something that's attractive for people to want to occupy. So with that, some questions. I'm looking at the numbers that you presented, and so I'm doing some quick math, but you're showing a cumulative change over the last 10 years, projecting this fall, obviously, of 2,894 additional students from the fall of 2006, with and this is where I had to do the math, a change of on-campus housing availability of an increase of 1,205. So we also then have, adding up grads and undergrads, about 10,000 total commuters, because you don't know how many of this 5,900 number is grad or undergrad, correct? It's just students.
No, that 5,900 number is the undergraduate commuter population.
I'm sorry, 5,948 living in high density. That's
59
unknown if it's grad or undergrad?
That's correct.
Okay. So, and then in that 10,000, so we've got, so let's say 6,000 for math reasons. 6,000 living in high-density housing. We've got an additional 1,500 commuting from home, from living with their parents. So we've got 2,500 undergrads and graduate students that are commuting to campus from a place that they rent that's not a high-density housing, that's not living at home?
No, part of that population, and this doesn't capture it, this takes a look at the complexes that are in Mansfield, Willington, and to a lesser extent, Holland. There are a number of students, both graduate and undergraduate, who commute from rental housing outside of the town of Mansfield, outside of Willington. We know there's a very large graduate student and to a lesser extent undergraduate student population in Willimantic, as well as Vernon, and as well as Manchester as well.
Okay. Yeah, and I was going to mention that too, because I think, you know, we're focused on Mansfield for obvious reasons, but Willimantic has seen, I think, quite an increase in rental housing from UConn students as opposed to Eastern students. The Coventry Lake neighborhood of Coventry is filled with 9-month rentals that are summer rentals in the summer. And, you know, I think this issue extends beyond Mansfield when it comes to the effect on towns. It's just much more concentrated here. So you're talking then about, let's just talk about next year, but a projected increase of about 500 students from the fall of 2015 to the fall of 2016. And with the proposed demolition of Connecticut Commons, the net increase with Next Gen dorm, I'm getting names wrong, but is about 270 beds. Is that correct? Did I hear that? 290?
290 is what he said earlier.
So we're talking about just in the next year, an increase of an additional 210 or so students, give or take, that are not being covered by the existing housing stock on campus. And when you look at the cumulative change over the last 10 years, we've seen, you know, a difference of approximately 1,500 new students brought in over the last decade that don't have a place to live on campus if they wanted one. And I think that's a big challenge for Mansfield and the surrounding communities for how to house them. And I think that's one of the reasons why we've seen this. You know, we have over 400 rental houses in Mansfield. That doesn't cover all of them, obviously, but I think that number right there is, it's not 4,000 houses, it's a couple hundred, and I think that's a big part of it, that increase, and I think we're right to be concerned about it. So what part of your sort of master plan, not the physical location part, but when it comes to the students who are being brought in, whether you stay flat or not, what are you sort of considering when it comes to housing with that? What are your considerations when you say, oh, I think we could take an additional 1,000 students, we need to hire 25, we need to hire 100 more professors, we need to, you know, what do you do for housing with that when you're planning?
Well, of course, with campus master planning and enrollment planning, the university would give consideration and has given consideration to the availability on campus and elsewhere to accommodate our students. On the immediate horizon, or on the more immediate horizon, the university is discussing how we will fully and formally use the Nathan Hale Inn, because the university obviously has a hope and a goal to have a new modern hotel constructed in the area. And the university's plans consider then fully utilizing the Nathan Hale Inn as a location for accommodating students at the university. So there would be the opportunity to capture another 100 or 150 beds on campus if those long-term plans come to fruition. The university has shelved the construction of the Honors Residence Hall at this time while it considers important factors like operating budgets, enrollment growth, and as well the plans as they materialize with Next Gen Connecticut. There's not been a final determination that that project will move forward or that it will not. And so there is the possibility down the road that another 650 beds could come into the available housing stock at the university. And obviously, any enrollment growth would raise the question about where do we stand with on-campus capacity. And as Laura Cruikshank mentioned, the university has made great strides with the design and the execution of the design plan for that facility. But it's been shelved while we consider these other significant drivers that have an impact at the university. I would call your attention to the other chart that Mike mentioned earlier in his presentation, and I'll just share this very simple observation that I'm sure occurs to most of you, and that is there's a very good reason that's university-centric and student-centric as it relates to why few schools offer as large a percentage of on-campus housing for undergraduates as UConn and William and Mary does. There's only 10 schools on this chart that accommodate as much as 50% of their undergraduate student enrollment on campus, and that's because it's extremely expensive to build new housing. The cost per bed for the construction of the Next Gen Residence Hall surpassed $100,000 per bed. And it's not that we built great luxury into this facility. This is a traditional single corridor, double loaded with mostly double rooms in that residence hall, and it's not it's not a facility that accommodates students in apartment-style housing with kitchens in every unit or that type of housing. It's a very traditional residence hall. And our cost per bed are very similar when we benchmark against other universities that have built new housing or have new housing construction underway, like the University of Delaware and other locations. So the university is very mindful about constructing new beds because, as mentioned earlier, if the university extends the capacity on campus and students don't take those accommodations, the costs are passed along to the students, and specifically to the students who are members of the on-campus housing program. So we're very mindful of the fact. So the deliberations at the university are considering the operating budget of the university and the state block grant, the development of the private real estate market in and around Mansfield, and as well what the ultimate goals will be with enrollment as it relates to Next Gen and the future of the university on the Storrs campus. So we obviously, these are complex issues that the university faces, and we consider them in conjunction with each other. And in good ways, we conflate these. We think about these things and examine these issues together because they have implications for each other.
Thank you, and thanks for that answer.
And thank you, Mr. Shank.
I've got two more questions, actually, Mr. Mayor. I can come back to them if someone.
Except the problem is if the questions are going to have no disrespect to you or to anybody in the council, if there's going to be a lengthy predicate to the questions, I'm not going to allow them.
There isn't one. My last two simple questions.
Two simple
I had
questions.
a preamble, but
No preamble, no predicate. Two simple questions.
I had a preamble on the last ones, Mr. Mayor. So I'll be very quick on them. The first one is just a request to get back to us with some more information. I would love to see this chart going back another 10 years, looking back into the 90s into 2006, and see the growth that occurred then. So if you can find that data and present it to us in a similar way, that'd be awesome. And then my other question is completely unrelated, which is, we've got the superintendent waiting patiently behind you, and I was wondering if you wanted to offer any comment about the discussion you heard that we had with him just now.
Mr. Kirk?
Only to say that he is correct, that this is very preliminary, and the answer to most questions about it are, we're not sure yet. But I will say that he was accurate when he said, in response to the question, what would UConn do with the E.O. Smith building and property? And he's correct, that we would want to use it for academic, administrative, and athletic space. We have sufficient Division I athletic space on campus, but virtually no club sports athletic space on campus, and there are far more students that participate in club sports than to participate in Division I sports. Also, the opportunity to be able to teach classes in the between 70 and 80 classrooms that are in E.O. Smith is also a very attractive opportunity, and so he was absolutely correct in his description of what we would use that property for. And if I could add, seeing some of the comments in the paper and in the council, the town and the university have a partnership going back almost 17 years at this point, where a number of really high-profile, important projects were the result of close collaboration between both the town and the university. Exhibit A is Storrs Center across the street. It's also the conservation of 130 some odd acres in the Moss Sanctuary back there. That was a partnership between the town and the university. Bringing water to Mansfield and Storrs was also a partnership between the town and the university. And sewer, the pending sewer agreement. We also worked together to do things like end spring weekend. So I feel like we have a very good track record of working closely together. And if these discussions with Region 19 progress and come to fruition, we would want the council and the town in general to know that we see the town's voice as a very important one. And anything we did with something that was that centrally located as E.O. Smith, as centrally located as Storrs Center, we would want to do in close collaboration and conversation with the town. It's more than just hearing your concerns, it's wanting to work with the town.
Thank you for that answer, Mr. Kirk. Mr. Kotchenberger.
Thank you. Let me just follow up on E.O. Smith. I appreciate that answer. What about the potential, how interested, and what are the discussions you've had in terms of, within UConn at least, in terms of buying the land and selling the land and property to a private party?
Selling the E.O. Smith land to a private party?
Yes, if you acquired it. I mean, if you acquired it and then selling it for whether it's private housing, commercial real estate, whatever. Or are you thinking only, right now, only of using it, as you said, academic and athletic?
Well, we can only speak to the near term, and I think going beyond that is probably getting way ahead of ourselves because these discussions are so preliminary. So I wouldn't want to say yes or no or commit or not commit at this point because we know very little at this point.
So that remains sort of open, then, the whole issue.
Well, I wouldn't want to foreclose anything without knowing exactly what we'd be talking about. I think it's too early to be able to even discuss it seriously.
Okay, let me move out then just back to a couple of the other student housing. I mean, I understand that, of course, not every student, it's never been the case, and maybe even more so now, not every student wants to live in dormitories, and that number is not precisely calculable. But I'm not sure I agree. It's, or if anything seems anecdotal, it's the idea that if we build more dorms, in fact, there could be a high vacancy rate. In fact, have you ever had a significant vacancy rate in dorms, not at the end of the semester when perhaps a few more people than you expected moved out, but at the beginning?
Absolutely. In the mid-1990s, our vacancy rate was between 20 and 25%.
But then shortly after, right, because I remember growing up here, for every couple of years we hear all the stories about, and it's not a bad story, in the fall, about people having to, be in triples, which goes to your point about repurposing, community rooms. The hotel obviously was not built to be a dorm, so the fact that you have people in dorms and these stories indicates, what about in the last 10 years? I mean, how, what is the vacancy rate, say, in the last 10 or 15 years, particularly since you have additional students, students living in the hotel as well as other areas?
Well, I will turn to Michael for the question on vacancy rates. But I will say, so we did scale up pretty dramatically, as Michael detailed, in response to student demand, because our enrollment was growing and adding 1,200 new beds. But it's not a situation at this point where the demand is outpacing the supply. In other words, we don't have long wait lists of students seeking to get into housing. The student applications for housing are almost identical to the actual housing that we have. And so we're able to understand what the actual student demand is and then act accordingly.
This pattern is common. So our recent years, and I would say over the last 3 years, for example, our fall occupancy rate is in the high 90s%, so 97, 98, up towards 100% occupancy, because we're committed to accommodating all continuing students who prefer to return to campus and live on campus in the coming year. And we're involved in that process right now with our current students. So
You don't guarantee housing on campus, though, do you?
for students who are currently in the housing program, we guarantee those continuing students the opportunity to return in the following year. And unless they leave campus and then wish to return, they can continue through their 4 years of study at the university. So we are currently accommodating requests for remaining on campus in university housing. And then we, in the summertime, have a deadline by which students who are the incoming class indicate to us if they wish to live on campus or not. And many, as we've mentioned, choose to commute and remain at home with a parent or a guardian. But we're duty-bound to accommodate the students who are new to the university coming in as freshmen, that we will accommodate them on campus. So sometimes when we open, we're actually above our real capacity by a handful of students. We find an alternative that will work for a couple of weeks until we actually then can do an audit and determine who the no-shows are and where those no-show spaces are. But through the course of the fall semester, most years, the last few years, we're at 98+% occupancy. We have end of the fall semester melt or transition. Many students graduate, some go study abroad, some leave the university after studying at the university as international students, part of special programs, and we currently have several hundred vacancies that we're not able to fill because we've already offered those spaces to any student who came to the university new during the spring semester. Many of them have taken a space, but we still have several hundred vacancies at this time.
Thank
you, Mr.
An addendum
Go ahead,
to
Mr. Kirk.
my previous answer, Peter. What I was trying to get across as far as the use of E.O. Smith, or the potential use of E.O. Smith should we move forward, is that any use, no matter what it was, would be something that we would want to work very closely with the town on. The school itself, the property is extremely central to the town. It is right on what is essentially the main street. And so I wanted to push back against this fear that I've heard from people that the university would somehow strike out on its own and do something against the will of the town with this property. I don't think that's the case. I think we'd want to replicate the other partnerships that we've been able to put together in this case, if indeed it does move forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just had one more question.
One more question.
There's statistics on percentage enrollment. I mean, this is helpful, and thank you for doing it, and we've seen this. But having said that, the percentage enrollment to some extent isn't really the important issue or the important question. I mean, if we were to increase by, 5,000 students, for example, and you still house 70%, how could we, it's the capacity of the town to absorb the remaining students, that's the issue, not the percentage overall of students that you have. And I don't know if I don't know if other schools have done it, but I think what would be useful if you want to do if you think it's useful to do a comparison of how UConn stands is, the number of students who aren't housed versus the number of housing units or population within the town, if you want to use it that way. I mean, some cities can easily absorb, 20 to 30%, of 5,000 additional 600 or 700 students because of where they are, particularly if they're in a small or larger city. For that, 1,500 students, although they all wouldn't want to necessarily live in Mansfield or area, that would put extreme pressure. And what we do also know is it's not just anecdotal, is that in fact the number of housing rentals, I believe, have increased. So we do have a greater, we can document the pressure on single-family homes. It's not just anecdotal, it's, I think, verifiable. So is it possible to get more, if you think the comparison of other universities is helpful, and I'm not arguing it either way, more helpful would be not the percentage, but the number of students that they're potentially putting into the community as a basis of the size of that community.
I think that is something to think about. Thank you for that.
Okay. I have a couple of questions or comments of my own before I call on the town manager. First, with regard to Mr. Kirk's statement, I'm not hearing exactly the same thing as you are in terms of the neighborhood impacts of students. Some of the folks who've come before the council have said that quite a few of the students, maybe even most of the students, are actually quite well behaved and are good neighbors. The issue that we have in this town is the quality of life in our neighborhoods. And the concern, besides the bad behavior students, and they're out there, but the concern we have is that when a neighborhood ceases to be a single family neighborhood, the entire character of the neighborhood changes. We have seen maps produced by the neighborhood preservation group that are demonstrating how many houses have been bought on which street, some on my own, and how many then follow after the first one or two become investor-owned rentals. So I think that the issue you identified in your opening comment, Mr. Kirk, part of the issue, which is parties, rowdiness, noise. But it missed, I think, a significant part of what Councilor Moran's committee is looking at, which is the quality of life in this town. We are seeing before our very eyes that investor-owned properties are not maintained as well as owner-occupied properties. So I think it's important for you to know and understand that as well, Mr. Kerr. I don't know if you want to react, you can, but I'm adding to your statement from our point of view in this town.
Yeah, I think I would say that the question marks are not so much on effect. I think the question marks are much more on cause. And so I don't dispute the concerns that people have about single-family homes becoming rental properties. I don't know of anybody who would want that in their neighborhood.
I would also note on the 70% figure, I think I would frame Mr. Kachenberger's comment a little bit differently than he did. Quite simply, if you maintain the 70% ratio, but you increase the bottom line number, that's more student bodies looking for places to live. So maintaining the 70% ratio doesn't help the issue because that creates, given all the other factors that you cited, creates a need for more housing, which, as we in town have seen it, a need for more conversions from single-family neighborhoods to student-occupied housing. So you increase the number of students, you increase, even though you keep the 70% ratio, there are more people looking for space.
Yeah, and part of the reason we wanted to come here tonight was to talk about those changing enrollment projections. I think 5,000 was seen as a very big number. And
I would also say, as someone who tries to listen very, very carefully to everything that everybody says in public participation, my colleagues and our visitors, when you came here before, Associate Vice President Sally Reese was here, and she said, and I will not attempt to quote her words, when she gave us the high out-year projections of Next Gen that Councilor Raymond was referring to, she said, you know something? If our operating budgets don't get better soon, none of this is going to happen, or it's going to be capped at a certain point. Those were not her exact words, but she said it very clearly that the original vision of Next Gen was not necessarily going to play out that way. And yes, you've reinforced that tonight. So I listened to her, and I listened to her to you, and I appreciate that. One last comment, I will call on Ms. Raymond in a moment, is you classify UConn as suburb large, or whoever does this chart that Mr. Gilbert produced classifies as a suburb large. I don't think we're suburb large. I think we're suburb small. And if you look at it from that standpoint, we basically are where we are at the very least where we should be, and argue some people in town say it should be hard, it should be harder, should be higher. But
yeah, if I could just comment on that, that's U.S. News characterization of what Storrs, Connecticut is, so not ours.
Yikes. Okay, Ms. Raymond?
I just wanted to make the point, too, people talk in terms of the quality of life of the neighborhoods. It's also a very economic issue. I mean, it's probably one of the single most important purchases that a middle-class person can make is a home, their house. You just bought one. I mean, that's a big investment, and it's a major investment for people, and they buy those homes with a great deal of thought as to what the neighborhood is that they're going into. And a whole host of issues, which are quality of life issues. But then if over time the neighborhood changes demonstrably because of private sector people coming in and buying up all your neighbors' homes when they are leaving, it's an economic issue when you go and turn around. You know, all of a sudden this isn't a lovely little neighborhood with single-family folks and their children. It's become... And it's not to say that the students aren't necessarily good neighbors. I'm not making any judgments in that regard, but it's a pure economic issue as to whether you can take a major investment and turn around and sell it for the profit that you'd like to see. So it goes well beyond just quality of neighborhood or quality of life. It's economic.
I would say Councilor Raymond's concern is also what we're hearing from residents who are coming to this council and who are coming to Councilor Moran's committee. Yes, part of what they're saying, besides the way that the tenor of neighborhoods changing, is it's affecting the value, the resale value of their home, of their homes. I can't expect you to come up with a way to interfere with a private market. I don't know that that's possible, but it's a real live concern, and I think we need to keep talking about it. Mr. Hart.
Thank you for coming. Two questions for you quickly. One, what do you think is the best way for the town to stay abreast of major changes in enrollment? And then secondly, and perhaps more importantly, could we consider a process in which the town could have some input or comment on proposed major changes in enrollment? I'm thinking of the Town University Relations Committee as a potential venue for both items.
I tuned into the February 22nd council meeting, and I found myself wishing for the part of it that dealt with UConn, that someone from UConn had been here to participate during that rather than now and after the fact. And I think it's fair to say we are always happy to come before you to discuss any issue where town and gown meet, whether it's here or the Town University Relations Committee or at a staff level. We're more than happy to provide updates on any issue that you'd like to talk about, whether it's an enrollment or another. And I think the Town University Relations Committee is a great place for the town to share its views on whether it's enrollment or some other issue, because Michael and I are both there, several other senior UConn staff people are there. And so there are a lot of avenues for the town to express its view on things to us, and we're always happy to listen and work with you when we can.
Mr. Hart, are you done?
Well, perhaps we could give this some consideration then at the Town University Relations Committee level. Perhaps it's a standing agenda item once a year or something along those lines, just so that we can be made aware in advance of pending decisions. And if there's a way for us to provide comment or input into that, I think that would be very much appreciated and valued.
Great. Thank you. I want to express my appreciation for your coming here tonight and for taking the questions. I think that 3 years, Ms. Cruikshank was at the last one. It was at least 3 years ago. Could have been 4. I joined the council in 2. Okay, then you were brand new at the time, so it was in 2013. We need to have more frequent sessions like this. And since you asked to be invited and expressed a willingness to come, Mr. Kirk, we are going to take you up on that. And we want to know, part of the follow-up, as Mr. Hart suggested, may well be in the Town University Relations Committee. But I think that all of us who are responsible, the people who elected us, need to be brought in. And this was good, and we need to do more of it.
Well, in general, in my recent experiences, the relations between the council and the university in general have been very positive and productive. Not that we've agreed on everything all the time, we haven't, but we're happy to communicate as often as you think, as often as you'd like.
And I thank you, and I thank all of you for giving up your evening.